Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show. Today is Thursday, November 3rd. We are just 5 days away from the midterm election. Will it be a red wave? Will it be a red tsunami? Will it be a black swan? Joining me, as always, on Thursdays, the producer extraordinaire, Duane Patterson, if I can spit this out, of the universe, master of the universe, HUGHNIVERSE.com, the troll-free web surfing experience that Hugh Hewitt fans and listeners should be part of. I'm there every week, really, as Duane's guest on the after show. We were there last night and talking about some of the same stuff, right? I mean, right now, the big stories, the big story to me are the three biggest stories to me are midterms, Elon Musk's actions at Twitter, and this DHS disinformation policing that the Intercept exposed. Those to me are the three,
which is scandalous. Yes,
absolutely.
So yeah, it's your show, Coach Heath. You tell me which direction you want to go first, and we'll go there.
Well, let's hit the DHS one just a little bit, because we did talk about the midterms a bit last night. There's been some developments this morning too. We want to get to those as well, and of course, there's going to be developments all day long as more and more polls dropped. But let's talk a little bit about this DHS story, because I actually have an interview with John Schindler that's going to come up right after you. I recorded it yesterday, and it'll come up right after you. And we talk about it quite a bit, so we don't need to delve into it too much. But I mean, this is a blockbuster. I mean, you've got the Department of Homeland Security partnering with FBI to incentivize and pressure private sector social media platforms into removing information in blocking debate and discussion of political matters going into the election.
This is now, the left had no problem. The House Democrats impeached Donald Trump twice for, just BS grounds. There's lots to not like about Donald Trump, and there was plenty of things they could have actually tried to impeach him on, but they tried two things to impeach him on that were just utter nonsense. This is actually something that's impeachable. If Donald Trump would have done a stunt like this, not only would the House have impeached him over it and gleefully impeached him over it, but the vote in the Senate would have actually been closer. Now, I don't think it would have actually removed him from office in the Senate, but in the Senate, you would have actually had Republicans voting to impeach him over a stunt like this, and those votes would have included people other than Mitt Romney.
Yep,
because this is really underhanded stuff. This is really high crimes and misdemeanor stuff. When you are using the federal branch of the government to basically squash dissent and squash speech in this country, it's really seedy what is being uncovered here. And we talked to Jim Banks today, by the way. Jim Banks is the chair of the Republican Study Group. In all likelihood, once the wave subsides and the newly constituted House GOP majority comes up with their leadership, more than likely, there's a 85% chance that Jim Banks is going to be the House whip. He suggested that there's going to be hearings on this. They are going to get to the bottom of this, because this stinks to high heaven.
Yeah, this is, I think, flat out un-American. If you want to talk about fascism, there's all this time. Joe Biden last night was sort of dancing around the whole idea of, MAGA extremists being fascist. This is actual fascism.
This is actual fascism.
Government combining with private industry to limit speech and to suppress dissent. That's actual fascism. That's government industry partnership is
textbook definition. I don't care if there's even woke ideology in the textbook. It's still textbook definition of fascism.
Yeah. And I don't think, and the rest of the media is still sleeping on this. Did you read the?
They're not sleeping on it. They know all about this story. They are intentionally not reporting it. Well, it's not sleeping indicates that they're just unaware of it. They're aware of the story.
They're aware of it. Yeah. You did read, though, the long analysis of this at the New York Times and the other one at the Washington Post, right? And the long broadcast segment on CNN discussing all of these details, right? You read those and watched those?
Oh yeah, they're everywhere. Right.
No, neither did anybody else because it doesn't exist.
Because it didn't exist.
They are covering the story. They are covering this story with a pillow until it stops moving. That's the
correct
Iowa Hawk blog. David Burge definition of how media covers a story that's bad for Democrats.
This is the absolute last story they want at the exact wrong time. They may rediscover the story if it's a 50-seat turnover in 6 seats in the Senate. If it's a complete massacre, and the bloodletting begins on the left, and Joe Biden is a lame duck, and everybody starts clamoring for his head, and they hand him the Lyndon Johnson speech. If all of that happens, then media all of a sudden, what's that, Mr. President? You don't want to commit to just being a one-termer, and you're not going to run again. Well, that's when you'll see the story come out.
Yeah. When they've decided that Biden is a dead letter, basically, is when that story is going to come out. However,
right.
That brings us to last night's speech, right? Which was, I'm still not sure what the hell they were trying to do. What he thought he was trying to do, I guess, was rally the base. But this was
who watched it? Honestly, who watched that speech? It was, from my understanding, it was on Fox, it was on CNN, it was on MSNBC, right?
Yeah.
Who watches MSNBC in prime time historically?
Just the extreme left, and
not more people listen to Hugh's show, the show I produce. More people listen to that in a half hour than watch MSNBC in prime time. How many people on CNN watched it? Even less.
Yeah. And Fox was running it so that they could use, they could pinball off of it, basically.
Absolutely. So basically fisking off it almost in real time and using it for show prep. So I again, I don't know who his targeted audience was and what the White House comms team thought they were going to get out of it. It was a reset to get the point across without leaving the bad taste like from last one, that like this was something they had to cross off their list. It did nothing. Last night we talked about this, and somebody had a scorecard of all the key buzzwords, inflation, gas prices, food, crime, immigration, border. How many times were all these things brought up in his address to the nation last night? Zero, nothing. I mean, crickets. All he cared about was democracy. And they can try to go with this strategy, but that's like a football team that only knows one play, an off tackle run play, and that's seriously the only play they know how to run. And after a couple of times, the defense has pretty much figured out how to seal that hole, and they're not moving the ball anywhere. But that's the only play they know how to run, so they just keep doing it and losing 2 yards every time they hike the ball. It's
Yeah, but I get that. Okay, so they're incompetent, so they're idiots, and I kind of get that. But I mean, even an incompetent had to look at that and say, "Look, we've got one more shot at trying to get, trying to at least address the concerns that voters are still expressing to try to take the edge off of this thing."
Then the only way they can do that is to yank that speech out of Biden's hands and let Barack Obama give that speech. That's the only way that.
Yeah, but Barack Obama was not going to get a primetime slot, and he wasn't going to get live coverage on 3 networks. That's a presidential level coverage. Barack Obama doesn't.
Then I'm reminded of the line from Chariots of Fire that you can't put in what God left out. Joe Biden cannot. He does not have the capacity.
That's not true.
He can't deliver that speech. He can't deliver that speech.
But at least you could try, right? And this is the part that just absolutely floors me about what happened in last night's speech, which was that it was the same speech that he gave in late August.
Watered down without the heart and passion in it, because they were worried of him, coming across looking like Hitler's uncle,
like this.
Yeah.
I mean, the screen grabs. like this in front of that, dark, black and red, that black and red, Reichstagish look behind him. That was Independence Hall, but it didn't look like Independence Hall because they lit it up with red lights in the middle of the night and not very strong red lights.
Right.
And if you look,
put two Marines and put two Marines in there to do the stand-in for the SS.
Right, but if you look at a wider picture, of that, it was actually, red, white, and blue, but the red was right behind Biden for this. It's just awful optics, right? These guys are idiots. And so, and idiots explains a lot about this. But this is the same strategy they used in August. What happened after that speech in August? If you believe the pollsters, and I'm not sure that we should believe the pollsters here, but if you believe the pollsters, it resulted in an immediate reaction of voters thundering over to the GOP.
He lost what, 6 points in approval rating, and the congressional GOP map moved significantly or noticeably to the Republicans. It was a disaster.
It was a disaster, and apparently they're just never going to admit it was a disaster. They doubled down on disaster rather than say, look, we got one more shot at this. Let's try a different approach, because it clearly didn't work the last time around.
What was the Bruno Kirby line in Good Morning Vietnam after he got yanked off?
Deep in my heart, I know I'm funny.
Yes, deep in my heart, I know I'm funny. That'll be all, Lieutenant.
Yeah. Lieutenant Steve. Oh, Lieutenant Steve. He's Lieutenant Steve. Joe Biden is Lieutenant Steve. Unfortunately, so is his entire political team in the West Wing. They're all lieutenants.
Just incompetent boobs.
Totally incompetent. All right. So that brings us, of course, and this is going to be really the main topic of today's podcast, because it's the last one that you and I are going to do before the midterms, which is the midterms, and the scope of the coming route. And you've been more optimistic than I have, right? We talked about that.
I'm team optimist. I just am.
He's team red wave. He's team red tsunami. I'm team red wave. He's team red tsunami. However, I will tell you that there's a little bit more evidence for your point of view coming out from Gallup. And I think this was yesterday, right? Which is the key indicators and seat losses for U.S. representatives for president party in recent midterm election years. Now, they actually roll this stuff back. They, because Gallup does a series of, longitudinal polling. So they're pretty reliable in terms of trend lines and stuff like that. You compare Gallup to Gallup and you get a pretty good idea of what's going on.
Sure.
All right. So remember the 2010 midterms?
I do remember the 2000 midterms.
Okay.
2010 midterms. That was the Obamacare reaction, the Tea Party wave, and that resulted in 63 House seats.
Yeah, that loss of 63 House seats. All right. So Gallup's approval rating for Barack Obama going into that midterm, the final one, I would imagine, was these are for final pre-election measures, usually October and November. Was 45% approval rating, 21% congressional rating, 22% level of U.S. satisfaction, and a minus 31 perception rating for economic conditions. Right? It was pretty harsh cycle for Democrats. They lost 63 seats. Would you like to hear what the indicators look like right now?
Lay it on me.
Joe Biden, 40% presidential approval, 5 points lower than Barack Obama in that cycle. Congressional approval is the same, 21%. U.S. satisfaction, 17%. So it's about 5 points off from even it's actually at its lowest point ever in this cycle, 17%. Economic conditions are at its worst point ever in this polling series, minus 35%. I'll give you another comparison. Here's George W. Bush in the 2006 midterms, which were a disaster for Republicans, right?
Yes.
This is post-Katrina. Remember, this is the year after Katrina. It's just prior to announcing the surge, right, in Iraq. So everything was going wrong for George Bush in this election. Plus, you had a scandal, right? You had the Mark Foley scandal going on. George Bush's approval rating, 38%. congressional approval rating 26%, U.S. satisfaction level 35%, more than twice as much, about twice as good as it is right now. And economic conditions were plus 22 rather than minus 35. So literally, what would that be? 57 points better.
Yeah.
Or something like that, right? 57. Yeah, 57 points better. Republicans lost 30 House seats in that cycle. So with that in mind, first off, I mean, that's just delicious anyway. Let's go to Harry Enton, who actually does a really good job at CNN of digging into what all this means, right?
Harry Enton on CNN, Steve Kornacki on NBC.
Yep.
These are guys that look at the data and they know the networks they work on, and they know the audience that they're reporting to, but they have a hard time looking at that data and whistling past a graveyard and just doing happy talk. They're the guys that say, "Look, guys, I know you want to think this, but you see this number? This is not a good number." That's what Harry Enton does.
Right. So what Harry Enton says, looking at the long history here, these modern indicators, 40 years or so probably, the midterms were Americans are more dissatisfied than satisfied with the direction of the country. The party that held the White House has lost an average of 33 seats. That jumps to 46 seats in a president's first midterm. If we look at seat totals instead, the party holding the White House ends up with 186 seats on average when more Americans are dissatisfied than satisfied. That would be a 35 seat loss for Democrats, right? Mm-hmm. All right. Add to that this, Duane. In first midterms where Congress's approval rating was south of 25%, there's three of them, 1994, 2010, and 2018. All saw losses of at least 40 seats for the president's party, which also controlled Congress at those times. It's currently at 21%. Now add to that, Duane, and here's where I think I might need to tie you down to the chair just to keep you, from launching into the stratosphere. The most important factor to understand why Republicans have momentum is the president's approval rating. His approval in Gallup's poll stood at 40%, which is the second worst for an incumbent president in a midterm since 1974. It's the worst for a first-term incumbent. Biden's disapproval rating was 56% in the survey. No first-term president whose approval rating was below his disapproval rating in a midterm since 1974 has seen his party end up with more than 200 seats in the House.
Well, you see, if they're under 200 seats in the House from where they're at now, and the Republicans pick up the balance, that's a lot of seats.
Well, you're looking at a floor of 235, right? And probably higher than that. I mean, he's predicting 186 seats, right? And they currently have 219. So that'd be a 33 seat flip.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
You see, I'm even more bullish than that.
Which you would put, again, if they're at 186, I mean, you can do the math, subtract 186 from 435 and you end up with 249?
Right. You see, here's Sean Trendy and we may have talked about this before. Sean Trendy had a piece dealing with all the redistricting and why both sides in gerrymandering have made it so that in a fairly neutral election, meaning D+2, R+2 in a generic congressional map, not that many seats are actually in play because of the way they stack the deck. But by stacking the deck in the middle so that there's not a lot of movement one way or the other in a static or neutral environment, there are troughs when you get outside of that bell curve on both sides. When you get to R+3, a chunk more seats become in play, meaning in an R+3 generic map, that means D+2 seats are now in play that may not have been in play otherwise in a more neutral, straight up toss up election. Right. The last 4 or 5 polls, and this is one of the pieces I wrote it in the VIP section earlier this week. That congressional generic map is spreading closer to 5 in the last 4 or 5. If you get up to 5 by the time we get to election day and the actual map or the actual race looks like the Republicans win nationwide by 5, there is a trough there where you don't just jump, 5 seats more available or 10, 15 seats more available for every point that Republicans are on that generic congressional map. You go from 4 to 5, and it jumps from 15, 20 seats available to like 35, 40, 45 seats available. There is a big trough between 4 and 5. You get to GOP plus 5. That means every seat that is a D plus 4 seat now becomes in play. And then obviously some other ones too that are wild cards, but those D plus 4 seats are in strong jeopardy. And all of a sudden you are in a map where you can get 35, 40, 40, 42, 43 seats. And it's just a massacre. Again, if you want to look at a historical performance, because of how narrow the margin is for Democrats right now and the base from which the Republicans start with, if they add a net of 31 seats, which again is not outside the realm of possibility from anybody's standpoint now, but if you add 31 seats, that's the largest working majority a Republican Congress will have had in the last century. And we're talking about north of that. It's that big of a blowout.
Yeah, which brings us to the Senate, right? I mean, and we're looking at new polling here from New Hampshire. There's now 2 polls that show Don Bolduc up.
St. Anselm yesterday came out, showed Bolduc up 1.
St. Anselm, I think, was Tuesday. There was another one that came out.
Okay, it was this week. St. Anselm was yesterday. The other one was who was the other one?
We're all going to Real Clear Politics right now, and you should as well. RealClearPolitics.com. They do a great job.
Trafalgar is the other one, and so that's 2 polls in a row in 48 hours, and Trafalgar's got him up 1. And again, both of those showed even their last poll a month ago. Maggie Hassan had a 3-4 point lead, outer edge of margin of error.
Yep.
And so all of a sudden that shows movement. Do we know if any specific one is absolutely accurate? Who the hell knows? But again, they're both moving towards Bolduc to the point where Real Clear Politics on their Senate map, if you throw the toss-ups, whichever way they're leaning, even if it's by 1/10 of a point, if you have to split them and go the way that they're leaning, Real Clear Politics now has New Hampshire going in the red column. So they think that the way the poll seems to be going now, Bolduc is in the driver's seat. In Pennsylvania, a hold, but a hold nonetheless. We heard media try to say all this, including even on Fox News, try to say this week, all our data, all the polling, that the debate, the awful debate John Fetterman had nothing to do with the polling. Absolute no impact on the polling at all. What unmitigated, complete, unadulterated BS.
Right.
2 different polls in Pennsylvania, both comparables to similar polls taken pre-debate and post-debate. Pre-debate, 2 different polls had Fetterman up by 3 or 4, depending on the poll you're asking. Post-debate, Oz is now up 1. That's a 4 or 5 point swing, pre-debate to post-debate in one poll. Nothing really else on the ground has changed much.
Insider Advantage also has Oz at +3. Actually, yeah.
Did that one just come out today too?
I think that one actually came out over the weekend.
That may have been out late last week or over the weekend. That's true. Yeah. But that one's looking
on Friday. To me, it wrapped up on Thursday.
That one looks more and more like that's going to be a hold as well. Ron Johnson in Wisconsin's got a 5 point lead. He's not going to lose that. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution poll, the paper of record in Georgia, right? Their final poll in the race has Herschel Walker up 1 over Raphael Warnock. And why I'm very heartened about that is that the AJC has never in their history guessed accurately or reported a poll accurately on what the Republican percent vote would be. They have always underpolled and underguessed what the Republicans would vote. Now, they may have gotten the margin relatively close and they may have predicted the winner, but if the AJC has Walker up by 1 point, Walker's up by 4, is what I'm saying. They always undercount the Republicans in their polling.
So, and if you look at the RCP aggregation on this, you'll see that Walker is suddenly surging to a lead in several different polls, with the exception of the New York Times Siena poll, which we've written in the past,
which is a crap sandwich,
right? And holds right now holding a 1.5 point lead in the RCP tracking, which actually they say pollsters tend to just slightly underestimate Democrat turnout in Georgia. So it's actually a 0.2 adjustment backwards from a 1.7. Excuse me, 1 point. They adjusted 0.2% back to a 1.3 point lead or 1.3% lead for Herschel Walker. But again, I think that in Georgia, as in New Hampshire, I think the issue is how many people are going to split tickets between Brian Kemp at the top of the ticket and Chris Sununu in New Hampshire and Republican Senate candidates. I don't think you're good. I think in the end, you're going to see people more or less sticking with the gubernatorial ticket, especially because they're very unhappy about the status quo. I mean, you take a look at that Gallup result, right? And I think you have to look at all of this. And this is a reason why I think the Gallup thing is important. I didn't even mention this, but I don't think pollsters are properly factoring in the political environment. In fact, I might go back.
No, they're not.
And that Gallup poll is showing what the political environment actually is. And they're not modeling to that. And that's the reason why I think a lot of these races are at least somewhat different than what even the good polling is probably not picking up on the overall gestalt, if you will, of this midterm cycle.
I have been saying this everywhere I can for the last month, a couple of months. It's conventional wisdom for people to want to throw the bums out. And if you're a political party or a candidate in one of the two major parties, you face absolute impending electoral doom if you do one of the three things in a campaign cycle. One of the three legs of the stool, and you're dead meat. You either F with somebody individually, you F with their livelihood, or you F with their kids. If you do one of the three, and you don't even have to have done it. If you are perceived by the majority of the electorate to have screwed with somebody on an individual basis, like gun rights, or taking some right away, or messing with them, or doing something that affects their job, they lose a job because of something you did.
That's right.
Or you do something that affects their kids. May God have mercy on your soul, because the voters aren't going to be with you. The Democrats have done it all three legs of this stool in this cycle. They have messed with all three of the cardinal sins, and I'm sorry, we have never seen that in your and my adult lifetime. We have never seen an electoral predicate shaping up where one political party has taken up a chainsaw to all three legs of that wooden stool. They're going to get creamed. And I'm sorry, the polling is not picking that up.
Nope, I don't think it is either. Now, you mentioned the governor's races last night. I kind of pushed that off because I haven't really paid a lot of attention to governor's races in terms of overall trending, right? I mean, obviously, I'm looking at Ron DeSantis, who's going to blow out Charlie Crist in Florida. I'm looking at
that's a whole. I don't see any technical losses that we're going to have. Pennsylvania is not even a loss. Remember, that's a Democrat right now that Shapiro's replacing Tom Wolf, right?
I agree. Yes, that's right.
So that's, it would be nice if we could challenge for that, if we would have had a better candidate, but it is what it is. That's not a loss. That's just a kind of a missed opportunity. but Florida is a hold. Here is, see, my, and I'll write this up for hot air, but I'm basically kind of a power of five thinking right now. In governor races, I see Nevada flipping.
Yep.
And it's not even really close.
Yeah,
Sheriff Joe
that's clearly going in that direction, right?
Sheriff Joe Lombardo is going to beat Governor Sisolak, and he's going to beat him like a bongo drum. That's really not in much doubt. That's actually not even as in much doubt as Adam Laxalt is for Senate, and Adam Laxalt's up by 4 or 5 points depending on the poll. So you got one pickup in Nevada. The polling looks now like Laura Kelly's going to go down in Kansas, and that would be a really good thing. She's in real trouble there. I talked to John Campbell, who's actually in Kansas right now, and he says the feeling on the ground now and the way it's looking here is Laura Kelly's going down. She'll be a one-termer and gone. So that's going to flip. Michigan. Tudor Dixon's up over Gretchen Whitmer. Gretchen Whitmer is not very popular right now, and no. I think that's going to be another flip too. So that's 3 pickups. In Wisconsin, Tony Evers is down 1 point as an incumbent. He's sitting at about 44, 43%. And Tim Michaels has got a 1 point edge in him going into 4 days, 4 days to go, 5 days to go. Again, the metric here for Senate races and for governor races and even long-term House seats is if you're the incumbent and you're under 50% in job approval, and if you're under 50% in polling, and you're within margin of error, all those undecideds, they're not going to break your way. They're just not. You're in real trouble. And that's what's shaping up with Tony Evers in Wisconsin. He's well under 50, and he's chasing his Republican by a point, hoping that the late breakers will come home his direction. And there's no reason that he's been able to give them to do that. So Wisconsin, I see, is a 4th pickup. And then you got New Mexico. Mark Rinchetti is the same thing over Michelle Lujan Grisham. He's got in 2 or 3 polls, he's got a 1-2 point lead over Grisham. She's well under 50%. And again, even in a blue state like New Mexico, they don't like the crime so much. They don't like the open border so much. They don't like the fentanyl coming in so much. And Mark Rinchetti is beating her over the head with this stuff. Plus, she's perceived to be a little crooked, and it's just a toxic combination. And I think you've got a 5th there. That's fine. And Republicans already have 30 out of 50 states, something like that. I mean, they've got a large share of governorships already. They're going to gain at least 5, and that's in a decent red wave. If we're talking tsunami, then we could even talk about Lee Zeldin in New York. I don't know if he can climb that deal or not. The polling there is just wild. One day you'll have Lee Zeldin up by 0.8 of a point, and the next poll has Hochul up by 13.
Yeah, but New York being New York, right? I mean, I think if Lee Zeldin wins that race, you're not talking red wave. You're not even talking red tsunami. You're talking red, sweet meteor of red death, like we said last night.
You were talking, Noah and the red ark with the red giraffe sticking their necks out the window, right? Yeah, you're talking, biblical flood here.
Cats and dogs living together, mass hysteria.
Yes. And then that would be 6 if it's biblical proportions, and if that flips,
right,
then the great white whale that is out there is Minnesota, because that's closer than it should be. I want to believe, I'm not there yet, but I'm saying if New York flips and all these other seats are flipping, Tim Walz is not over 50 in Minnesota.
He's not, but that's not as close. I think the race to look at there that Republicans are going to win is the Attorney General race,
where
Keith Ellison
is down by 7. He's down by 7.
A couple of polls, yeah, very unpopular.
And if
I don't know how he got elected in the first place. Frankly, I don't know how he got elected in the first place because he's not popular statewide either.
But if he's down 7, and show me how Tim Walz is real popular again, I'm just saying.
Ellison's a different cat, man. He's a completely different cat.
I understand, but in this environment, in this wave, crazier things have happened. I don't have it in my main 5. My 5 right now are Nevada, Kansas, Michigan, Wisconsin, and New Mexico. Those are the 5 that are going to flip. Outside edge, maybe New York. And I mean, if we're talking about the wheels totally coming off the wagon, sure, why not? Let's go for Minnesota too. In the Senate, I've got another 5 that are going to get, and everybody thinks I'm crazy, but I got 5. I got Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, New Hampshire, and the polling backs me up on all of them. The weakest one of the 4 there, I'm sorry, the weakest of those 4 are Arizona, where Blake Masters is tied in every poll. He's come all the way back to tied with 4 days to go. And again, same thing. If you're Mark Kelly and you're under 50, which he is, and he's been under 50 pretty consistently.
Yeah.
And he's going to count on the undecideds to just all of a sudden magically go his way because he's working on inflation.
No. At least he's talking about inflation. Joe Biden can't even do that.
But the late breakers are not going to go to Mark Kelly. They're going to go to Blake Masters. He's going to win this thing by 2.5 points.
Yeah. Again, same thing. Environment. The Gallup is the first pollster who's actually shown what this political environment looks like. And I'd even say might even be underestimating just a touch. But at least they're showing a more accurate parameter
And Katie Hobbs is such a god-awful candidate. I think she is probably the single worst candidate of the cycle. We've talked about this before. She is so bad at this that Carrie Lake's going to win in a walk. She's going to win going away, and if she wins going away, there's going to be some coattails. Maybe not as strong, but I'm very confident Blake Masters is going to pull that off. So that's 4. My 5th, and the same rule applies. The same under 50 thing applies. Washington State. I know the polling, you can't, it's damn near impossible to poll a state where it's mail-in balloting and all sorts of craziness can go on there. I totally understand that. Patty Murray can't get above 43 in as an incumbent. She's stuck at 43, and nothing that they have been able to throw out in campaign ads has moved her off of that. She's at 43. She's got a 1-point lead, and all the undecideds are sitting there like, who should we go with Patty Murray one more time? I get all this. I get all the negativity. This is Washington State. Trust me, I live there. I've got relatives there. It's never going to flip. The machine's too big. You can't beat it. I hear all that. She's still stuck at 43. And the last 2 Trafalgar, and I think there was one other one. She's within 1. If she's within 1-2 points in Washington in a wave year, I count that. I count that a lot more than I count Colorado. Colorado is that's my we're talking biblical cats and dogs.
Noah's Ark. That's the Noah's Ark. That's the Noah's Ark measure.
That's my Noah's Ark.
O'Day, as much as I like O'Day,
I don't. He's going to get close. He'll get within 2 or 3, but I don't think he can close a deal unless, of course, it's just everybody is off and take whatever poll number and add 5 to the Republicans. It's that kind of a year.
Right.
So I got 5 governors, I got 5 senators, and my house seat. If you take 5 times 5, that's 25. I got a final number of 250. I think it's going to be a net 38.
All right. So my over under is 245. I think
we're not far off.
We're not far off there. I think 52 in the Senate, because I'm not at all optimistic about the state of Washington, not like you have been, very entertainingly so. So final question before we wrap this up, because we're getting to the end of this thing here.
Sure.
Let's say it's a big red wave, right? A 2010 red wave or a 2014 red wave. What happens with Joe Biden? Because you're already starting to see the New York Times signal, oh, hey, this guy is fumbling on the campaign trail. I mean, and we talked about this last night too. The Hill leaked something, I think it was on Monday, that Joe and Jill were meeting with their political advisors to start planning out the 2024 reelection campaign. If the shellacking is as big as the Gallup numbers tend to indicate, does the media turn on Joe Biden finally at this point in time and start reporting honestly?
They don't turn on him immediately. Who turns on him are the party leadership, what's left of them. The party leadership, what's left of them, will walk into it. He will come back from Rehoboth Beach. He'll come back from Delaware after his 83rd vacation, and he will see the Lyndon Johnson speech sitting on his desk to give, and they will basically say, "You're not running again. We cannot survive as a political party with a netter shellacking if you stumble your way through this. You beat Trump, God bless you. You did your job." They're not going to push him out early. They're just going to say, you're going to announce this is your one term and you're going to go right off into the sunset, and let the primary process begin, and we're going to try and young it down because we've got to rebuild. You can't do it. And if he doesn't go, that's when you'll see what happens next, because Joe's either going to say, well, okay, and he's going to give the speech and he's going to be all mopey about it, and he's going to try and say, my health is he'll make up whatever excuse and he's going to get out. Or he's going to get feisty and he's going to say, F you, I'm not, nobody else with a Biden, I'm going to beat all you suckers, and he's going to get indignant. That's when the leaks from the party elites are going to go to media, and that's when the media will turn on Joe and they will bleed him out.
Yep.
That's how I see it playing out.
I see it playing out pretty similarly. I think that the whole, we were planning the 2024 campaign leak was a last-ditch effort to try to claim that Joe Biden isn't the millstone around the necks of the Democrats that the polls and analysts are saying that he is, but he clearly is. I mean, he's clearly a millstone. And if the midterms come back in any way, shape, or form, the way that this thing's shaping up to be, it's not good. Yeah,
he will be the lamest of lame ducks.
Yep. Especially if Republicans take both chambers of Congress.
Yes.
Nothing that he does is going to get through at this point in time, and he's either going to have to start working with Republicans, or he's going to be sitting by himself an awful lot. And I suspect it's going to be more the latter.
And about four what's that Millie who's the Scaramucci's.
Scaramucci's, yes.
4.5 Scaramucci's after Joe Biden gives his "I'm not going to run again" speech. Joe Manchin's going to announce he's not going to run again.
Yeah, I think he's done. I think Manchin's done. Manchin's got nowhere to go anyway. I mean, he's screwed the pooch. Manchin has. So, yeah. All right, Duane, we got to wrap this up. What's coming up on tomorrow's Hugh Hewitt show?
Well, Dr. Larry Arnn will be on like he normally is. We will have, do we have a candidate tomorrow? Let me see if we do have a candidate tomorrow. We have Tom Cotton will be along, Sonny Bunch will be along, Tarzan Joe will be along, Larry Arnn will be along, all sorts of fun stuff ahead. Tom Cotton's had a pretty remarkable week, actually. And
it's going to get better because before this thing goes up, your VIP column is going to go up today about Tom Cotton. 2 o'clock this afternoon Eastern time will go up.
Tom Cotton, the case for and against Tom Cotton, and again another one like the Pompeo one I did, kind of a tough one for me to write to be objective about it, because Cotton and Pompeo, they're friends. They're not just they're not just affiliated with the show. I mean, I'm on first name basis with them, and we brag on each other off air and on air. I mean, he's a buddy. So it was hard to try to write the negatives on Cotton, because in my head, with Pompeo and Cotton, there's not a lot of negatives, but I had to kind of put myself in a place where, what's he going to get dinged on? So I did my best to be political Switzerland.
Well, there you go. The VIP column from Duane Patterson going up this afternoon at 2 p.m., probably well before the podcast goes up. So you'll have already seen that. Go back and check it out. Join our VIP program. There's going to be a message at the end of this podcast about that. Coming up next, John Schindler on that DHS disinformation policing program, which he says, and coming from John Schindler, this says something, is actually evidence of a deep state type of impulse, at least, in the Biden administration. You want to stay tuned for that. And we'll be back with more. Don't forget to tune into the Hugh Hewitt Show, 6 a.m. in the Eastern time zone, 5 a.m. in God's time zone, 3 a.m. on the left coast. If you're a member of the universe, you can watch it live. Duane, if people have to tune in on the AM radio dial, what should they do if they can't find it on the AM radio dial?
Easiest thing in the world. You threaten the GM of a station where we should be on, and you threaten that you're going to bring Joe Biden with you.
It's either that or we're going to force you to carry Joe Biden's next speech live and then play it on rotation for the next week. Yeah, I think I'm going to go with that one, Duane. That's an excellent one. All right, Duane Patterson, thanks for being with us. We'll talk to you. And then on the other side of the midterms, he's got 250 and what is it, 54 or 55?
I got double nickels. I got
right.
I got 5.
250 and 55.
Believe me, I'll settle for 4, but I don't think it's going to be under 4. I think it's going to be.
There you go. All right. Okay. 250, 55. I've got 245, 52. And by the time we come back around to this, we'll see which one of us was right. All right, Duane, thanks for being with us. And stay tuned now for John Schindler. Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. I'm really excited to talk to my next guest, John Schindler, an Intel expert, a frequent political commentator, and somebody whose opinion not necessarily always runs in the same direction as mine, but I always respect what he's got to say because it's always really well-founded and always really well developed. And in this particular case, he and I are completely aligned on this DHS disinformation policing issue that was raised by the Intercepts. Ken Klippenstein and Lee Fang did a fabulous job in corroborating this story, in getting the briefing documents behind this and explaining, I think, John, the ramifications of this. I think that they've done an excellent job, so excellent, in fact, that apparently mainstream media doesn't want to cover it at all.
Thank you, Ed. Yes, it's so good we can't talk about it. Look, I'm not a habitual defender of the Intercept, which tends to be,
right,
constantly left-wing and quite anti-government, anti-intelligence community, which obviously I'm not. I mean, I work in the intelligence community. But, look, I don't see anyone coming out and saying that the Klippenstein and Fang report is factually wrong, because really, how can it be? It's based on U.S. government documents, the words of U.S. government officials. It's obviously true. We can debate how they might be spinning it, but the facts, the documents literally speak for themselves. And I think this is part of why the mainstream media is, avoiding it, because there's not much they can say to really shoot it down. And this is a really, really important issue, and it's something obviously I've been involved with a long time. It is a little complicated. It's not ideal for sound bites, but this really is for civil liberties and who we are as Americans. And I guess I'm old enough to think that's something we should all care about, no matter what party you belong to, no matter what your political views are. Free speech, non-interference with that free speech is an absolutely core American value, or so I thought.
Well, look, I think so too, right? I think that this is, and you made a really interesting point, and it's one that I actually do agree with, and tend to push back against when it's brought up, which is that you're not a big believer in the term "the deep state." Neither am I. What I'm a deep believer in is unaccountable bureaucracies being left to their own devices, which is really what we've had in the United States for decades. I don't consider it a deep state because I think a deep state is really references a completely different kind of picture. However, this is actually not that far off from it, as you also said. So I think you and I are in complete agreement here too. Normally, I think it's a unnecessarily hyperbolic description of the swamp, basically, is what it is.
Right.
This is different. This is actually a lot different.
Yeah, because it's quite specific. Talking about the deep state gives the sort of amorphous idea of unaccountable bureaucrats conspiring. And let me tell you, the truth is our intelligence community is 17 different agencies, some of them very massive, which hate each other, have huge disputes among themselves. No, really, I mean, they don't play well together. It's hard to have a vast conspiracy among them. What this story shows is how unaccountable bureaucrats and political appointees can really set up situations where they're at the cusp of very seriously abusing federal power, using, colluding with big tech for partisan advantage. And I got to tell you, I mean, I'm not that old, but I've been involved with U.S. government with countering disinformation for decades. And until the Biden folks, this stuff just didn't come in the room. I mean, you keep your crazy ideas elsewhere. Some lawyer in the room is going to say, "What are you talking about?" It is not ever the mission of any agency of the United States government to tell Americans what they can and can't say and what they can and cannot believe. The U.S. government in its current incarnation has one office at the State Department, the Global Engagement Center, whose job is countering foreign, please note, foreign disinformation. I don't think the GEC, as they call it, is as forward-leaning as they could be, but they're very clear. When the Russians make up some bizarre story that, the classic case was, AIDS was invented by the U.S. military, they'll come out and say, no, this is not true. This is why it's not true. This is where the lie comes from. Parentheses, don't pay attention to this. But they can't even say that, because if you're an American and you want to pay attention to that, you're free to pay attention to that. Going past that and any suggestion of telling Americans what they can and should think and read and feel it's mind-boggling. I don't know where this comes from. It's nuts, frankly. It's absolutely nuts.
Well, I think it comes from the idea that, first off, I think it comes from the idea that social media, and for that matter, regular media, are public goods rather than private enterprise, and rather than private, association, assemblies, and therefore they have the state has an interest in what transpires in them, which is a completely antithetical notion to speech, to commerce, and certainly to politics in the United States. And it's not the first time we've seen something like this, right? Because about a century ago, during World War I, they had, and I can never get this right, if it was the Sedition Act in 1917 or if it was the Alien and Sedition Act in 1917.
Yes, and on top of which the Espionage Act of 1917, which gave it real enforcement.
Right.
And President Wilson really did use this to stamp out civil liberties in a way that virtually everyone now agrees was just awful. I mean, look, the U.S. government shouldn't be touching propaganda. Even during World War II, when total war, declared war, President Roosevelt set up the Office of War Information to disseminate U.S. propaganda, both at home and abroad. And even then, that was controversial. There were Americans who, even in total war, were a little uncomfortable with the notion of the U.S. government telling Americans what they should believe. Certainly in peacetime, and there's no declared war going on that I've noticed, in peacetime, the U.S. government has no business being near any of this, period, full stop, no matter who is in charge. And my Democratic friends somehow don't get precedent. And if they're happy with Department of Homeland Security getting in bed with Twitter and Facebook, to determine what can and cannot be said on social media. If they like it when Biden's doing it, I hope they like it when, President Matt Gaetz is in charge somewhere down the road, because that's what they're begetting. And they never seem to think this through, and I don't understand why.
Well, they're not the only ones not thinking this through. I mean, your Washington Examiner column, which was great, by the way, put it up in the headlines. We'll probably quote it at least 2 or 3 more times over the course of the next few days, because it's just that good. And you should go to WashingtonExaminer.com and take a look at this. And it's Homeland Security betrayed its constitutional obligations is the rough title. I don't have it right in front of me at the moment. But you talk about the fact that journalists aren't speaking out about this. And these are the same journalists that have been, hyperventilating and fulminating about the onrushing tide of fascism from the right.
Yes.
And frankly, I I think that that's a load of nonsense. But certainly anybody's free to believe that. But this is literally and actually definitionally fascism. You've got government forcing a partnership with private industry to suppress points of view and political debate, and not just points of view on some sort of war effort, which we're not in, which Joe Biden keeps telling us we're not in, but on a whole wide range of issues, right? I mean, you look at this DHS document, and Li Fang, I think, was the one who's pointing this out on Twitter. They're talking about policing discussions of racial justice,
yes,
of the COVID-19 vaccines, of climate change. I mean, this is big brotherism, and it's definitionally fascist.
I don't need to put a label on it. Honestly, what I will tell you is I'm very tired from elite media journalists pontificating for years and years about democracy dies in darkness and fascism coming. And here we have an agency of the U.S. government toying with stuff that is really scary from any civil liberties perspective, or it should be, no matter what your partisan views are.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, one of the list of things DHS was interested in include racial justice, which that's a purely domestic issue. No,
right.
It's completely off limits. Even some of the foreign issues, where one of the issues was, talking about the Ukraine war. Look, it's fine if the U.S. government wants to debunk Russian lies about the Ukraine war.
Right.
That's fine.
I agree.
We should be doing that. I want us to be doing that. I do not want DHS, a domestic agency and a law enforcement agency. These people are cops, fundamentally, going to Twitter and Facebook to police what Americans are saying about the Ukraine war. That's nuts. I'm sorry. And I don't know what federal bureaucrats thought this was a good idea. We always used to joke in my time in the government about the Washington Post front page test, right? How would what we're talking about right here, even in a secret meeting, how would this sound if this got leaked and wound up on the front page of the Washington Post? Because if it sounds bad, maybe we shouldn't be talking about it. I'm serious. I mean,
I know it's funny because it's very clearly true. That's what makes it funny.
I mean, you had DHS bureaucrats talking about giving taxpayer money to private third-party entities, NGOs, basically, to disseminate Biden administration propaganda, deniably, so it didn't look like Biden administration propaganda.
Yeah.
First of all, I don't want us doing that even if it's foreign stuff, okay? If the U.S. government wants to denounce something as disinformation because it comes from Beijing or Tehran or Moscow, do that. Do it yourself. Talking about doing domestically, it's just insane. I don't know what's gotten into these people. I mean, if I'd been in that meeting, I would have said, we need to stop talking about this right now. This is not legal. I've actually had that happen during my government career where people, the lawyers would say, we're not going to be doing X, Y, and Z. Please stop talking about it. This is not a road the government's going to go down. So just drop it. Where were the adults in the room during these discussions, to use, the favorite liberal mantra, the adults are back in charge? Really? Where were they at DHS during all this? I really want to know. This is why we need congressional investigations. It's not that these things necessarily happened yet. Who thought they were a good idea to contemplate happening? I mean, this is just makes no sense to me at all. It really doesn't. It really doesn't.
Well, apparently it is happening because Facebook.
Some of it is definitely.
Yeah, built a portal for it. Yeah, I mean, and that's part of the Ken Klippenstein Li Fang report at the Intercept, right. Which I agree with you. Which is what makes it so much more compelling. And I don't want to denigrate the Intercept because they have done some really good work over at the Intercept. But that's the same outfit that bungled Reality Winners identity when they were
have a pretty consistent record of their sources going to federal prison. So don't leak to the Intercept. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was not one of their best episodes, but I mean, I've respected quite a bit of the work that they've done, even if I've disagreed with with the political thrust that they want to make of it. This is a legit story, and I don't even want to say I'm stunned, John. And again, we're speaking with John Schindler. You don't see him on camera, but that's not because he's hiding his identity. It's just he wasn't prepared to do it. I want to make sure that everybody knows it's not like we're going to put a blue dot over John's face. That's not what's going on here.
Not yet.
Just that the video wasn't ready on his end, and we really wanted to get this interview done. So, but John, I'm not stunned that the mainstream media is not reporting on this, including, I should say, the Democracy Dies in Darkness Washington Post. Because, and I mean, clearly the reason why they're not touching this story is because that program benefited them because they wanted the same things. They wanted to squeeze out people who were dissenting on climate change, people who were dissenting on Joe Biden's policies in Afghanistan, people who were dissenting on, on the vaccines. And look, I've gotten my shots. I'm totally fine with the vaccines. I don't think that they were as billed. Right. Clearly, because you can still get and transmit the virus. I do think, though, they help you probably in keeping them from getting too serious a case of COVID-19. But you weren't even able to discuss that at times on social media. And if you raised any of these points with the media, they would immediately call them, conspiracy theories. The whole lab leak theory for COVID-19 was derided as a conspiracy theory until all of a sudden the World Health Organization said, maybe we should really take another look at that idea. Well, the mainstream media is in on this, right? I mean, that's part of what the issue is here.
The mainstream media, as a general rule, is in on the conspiracy, if you want to use that word. I don't, but I mean, it is in a way. Yeah. Conspiracy again implies organization, and there isn't organization. What there is a meeting of interests, and a lot of mainstream media journalists agree with the positions taken by the Biden administration. And there are a couple other, and so I mean, saying they're on the gravy train is too strong, but they're not going to rock the boat when they broadly agree. And there are two other factors. One of which is, I think it's pretty clear that the younger generation of media folks, I mean, under 40-ish or so, simply do not have the sense that was once common in the mainstream media that we're going to go for the truth, even when it's difficult, even when I don't like that truth, we're going to report it. That's long gone. Second of all, and there's no nice way to say this, but I talk to journalists too, being a journalist myself of a sort. And there are a lot of them who know this is bullshit. They're not stupid, but they're not going to go out there and say anything because they'll catch hell on Twitter for it. Their life will become unpleasant. What happened to that NBC reporter, Dasha Burns, who interviewed John Fetterman, the Democratic Senate candidate, and kind of came out and she just said what we all saw, which that he's really not doing very well. Well, she got a whole bunch of BS on Twitter from her colleagues over that. None of them wanted to stand up and say, well, she kind of does have a point here, because there was a message. It was the wrong narrative. And I guarantee you right now, there are MSM reporters who feel not that much different than you or I do, Ed, about the specific DHS story, but they're not going to stick their necks out because it will not be pleasant for them, and they will no longer be invited to the cool kids table for lunch. And that's, peer pressure matters. It really does. So even the ones who get it, who are internally honest, they're not going to come out there and say it. I think that's a sad indictment of journalism in 2022 in America, but I think that's really where we are, frankly.
Well, I do too. And I agree with you. I don't think there's a conspiracy. I think there was a conspiracy with the social media platforms that were participating in this.
Yes,
because they were also getting financial incentives, or at least that was part of the proposal that is in the documents about financial incentives for cooperating with DHS and FBI on this. But not the journalistic media outlets. I think it's just a convergence of interests. And this is the problem with media, is that the media's interests are at least, I don't know, aspirationally, maybe, ideally, are just to report on the facts and get the information out to their news consumers. But those days are long gone, if they ever existed at all, John. And now they're political activists. They're political activist platforms. And I don't know how else to describe what's going on in this, because the ACLU announced that they were opposed to this, right? And I mean, the ACLU has not been exactly a redoubt on civil liberties over the last few years. And the ACLU,
but even this line, when it got crossed, the ACLU comes out of the woodwork and says, okay, this is a bit much, guys. Okay. I mean, this is right. I mean, look,
I want to do the Jonah Hill thing, right?
Exactly. I mean, where we're at is we've witnessed over the last couple decades, in my mind, the sort of triumph of what I call advocacy journalism, right?
Yep.
This is a new problem. It's been around a long time. But advocacy journalism, which will shape facts to meet a narrative, has gone from being something that sometimes happened to pretty normative, frankly, in the mainstream media, and even something that's held up as an ideal. You get Pulitzers for this now. And again, I'm not going to say this is a new problem. It's not. But it has become much more commonplace and much harder to penetrate. And this really, I mean, you want to talk about democracy dying in darkness. I mean, I actually think, one area where the Intercept and I might disagree on details, but agree, on the principle is, adversarial journalism is actually a really good thing and something we need. And do make the people uncomfortable. Do ask difficult questions. Don't only ask them of the other party, actually ask them. And, we've lost something when a whole generation of journalists cadre has come up that doesn't think about doing that because it might hurt their side. And it's not healthy for our democracy. It's not healthy for the free press or free speech. It really isn't.
All right, John Schindler, you can read his opinion column at the Washington Examiner, and I strongly urge that you do so. John, where else can people find you? I mean, I know you're on Twitter.
I'm on Twitter at 20 Committee, 20 Committee. I also run a Substack called Top Secret Umbra, UMBRA, which sounds very and is, but is devoted mainly to issues of intelligence, national security, terrorism, stuff like that, fun stuff. And there you can subscribe for free, or you can pay me money and get even more. Please pay me money. That's good. I try and get out there. I mean, I come at this from the perspective of a practitioner in the national security arena. But one of the big ironies here is, I've really pushed for a lot more transparency from the national security state, from the deep state, if you want to use that term, on a lot of this. And it's almost kind of embarrassing, frankly, that it falls to the Intercept. Not that they don't do good stuff sometimes, but why is the Intercept reporting on this DHS stuff and not the Washington Post, the New York Times? They presumably could have gotten these documents too. I guess they're just not interested. Well, I'm not going to call myself a whistleblower with a capital W, but when the intelligence community or our national security state is doing things that look to me like they're illegal and unconstitutional, I want that whistle blown and blown good and loud, and I'll do my part.
There you go, John Schindler at 20 Committee on Twitter, and you can follow the links over there, presumably to his Substack, where you should subscribe. Go to the Washington Examiner and read his column as well. John, thanks for being with us this week.
Thank you so much for this, Ed. Have a great day.
All right, stay tuned for just one more quick message from the Ed Morrissey Show, and you know what it's about, but you're going to stay tuned for it anyway. Coming up right after this. A new era at Hot Air has begun, and with the midterm elections just around the corner, our team is ready to fight for the conservative issues and bring you election analysis with new focus and purpose. This November, we face the choice of economic ruin with Joe Biden and his progressive Democrats, or a fresh start on the basis of American strength. But we need your help now more than ever to continue our conservative reporting and mission. By becoming a Hot Air VIP or VIP Gold member, you become an integral part of our team. Not only will you get exclusive access to reporting and commentary you can't get anywhere else, you will help us in our war against big tech and social media censorship. We cover the issues that truly matter, and with your help, the left can never silence us. You will also get access to my twice-weekly discussions with Adam Baldwin on The Amiable Skeptics, where we delve deeply into the philosophies and ideologies below the surface of today's current events. And you will support the vital work of Duane Patterson, who knows practically everyone in politics, Tampa's Tom Jackson, who gives Hot Air readers the inside scoop on Florida politics and more, and Jazz Shaw, and our newest team member, David Strong, who offer even more in-depth analysis on the latest political developments. And for our VIP Gold members, Bearing Arms Cam Edwards and I offer direct engagement with members through our live chats, the most fun hour we have in the week. We are humbled by the support our readers have already shown us, and we hope to have all of you join us to keep this mission on track. Over the last couple of months, I've been honored to lead Hot Air as our new managing editor and look forward to all that is to come. On behalf of our team, I thank all of you for your support. Help us expose and put a stop to Joe Biden and the Democrats' radical agenda. Join Hot Air VIP today and use the promo code SAVEAMERICA to receive a major discount on your VIP or VIP Gold membership. Thank you very much.